So you were a distance runner?
Yeah, like middle distance. And I didn't really compete very much at all. But yeah, I was pretty into it for almost 10 years, basically from like 15 or 16 until, yeah, about when I started lifting. Because I was
Okay.
kind of tired of it. I was injured a lot. And so I wanted to try something new. I went from 150 to, I think, almost 180 in like 4 or 5 months. I gained some fat, obviously, but it was not roly-polyville by the end of it by any means. And I think my body was just ready to grow. Years of distance running kind of like suppressed my body weight below where it actually wanted to be. And then once I stopped running so much and started lifting and then started eating as well, that's why I say to like pure beginners who are probably underweight, you can bulk more than like a pound a month. You might be selling yourself short if you really try to hold things back. Especially if you're hungry and you're lifting hard and you're underweight and you're a beginner. I mean, I was pushing like, I could actually check. In the first month, I gained 6 kilos.
Oh,
So
wow.
almost 15 pounds.
In one
And
month.
then in 1 month, 3 kilos the month after that, and then 3 kilos in the next 2 months after that. So pretty aggressive timeline of gaining, especially at first. But I
Yeah.
think I was just like underfed and underweight from all the running. And then my body didn't want to be that weight. I had been like comparing myself to all the Kenyans. And at my height, they were like 120 pounds or something. So I was just running a lot, not eating a whole bunch and trying to get lighter and lighter and lighter. Once I sort of discovered lifting and like I read a whole bunch about like bulking and gaining weight. And it was like a whole big paradigm shift. I was like, wow, I actually want to gain weight now. And so gain weight I did pretty aggressively. Some of that's going to be water weight and glycogen, just sort of filling out. But yeah, 6 kilos the first month. To be clear, it's not all muscle. Some of it certainly was.
For sure. Also, you were talking about the fact that you were a distance runner and then your work capacity. That could explain why you can handle 6 days per week, really high effort, high level intensity type training, which most, they like to pick on that. I find that's interesting. Like, this old saying, you can train hard or you can train long, but you can't do both. And you're smiling because, yeah, but you can do both. If you really want to, you can do both. It's just whether or not you can survive both, meaning from a recovery standpoint, and if it's necessarily required for your goal to do that much. So those are like two different things. But what's your take on that? Because obviously you're doing both. We've seen it. You're doing 6 days per week training, at least now. If I have my facts right, is that correct?
Right now, my split, which I've been using for a while now, day one legs, day two is sort of torso, so chest and back with like also overhead work, so a little bit of shoulders. And then day three is kind of like I call it bro day. So it's arms and delts, just like a whole bunch of isolation stuff. Like neck work would go on that day, forearm work, stuff that kind of just gets left behind for a lot of people because it's not like the big compounds, sexy movements. This is the stuff that if powerlifters did, they would have way better physiques typically. So that goes on day three. And then on the fourth day, I'll just start again. But if I need to take a day off, then I'll take a day off whenever. And there might be 0 days off a week. Sometimes I just keep going if I feel good. What really takes the longest to recover is the lower body. And so if I wake up on that fourth day and my quads are still sore and I'm kind of not banged up, not beaten up, but I could tell I'm not recovered. Like I get into a quarter squat and my legs are like still kind of trembling a little bit. At this point, I would rather push the workout back a day because I find that pretty much guarantees progression and a good performance, at least when bulking. When cutting, like maintaining performance is like a big win. But when you're bulking up, just pushing that back one day is usually enough to guarantee a good performance. Whereas if I don't take that day off, sometimes I'm fine, but sometimes it takes a long time to warm up and I can tell I'm not actually recovered. Sometimes I can will myself and repeat the performance, but it's not actually progression sometimes. It's the same reps, but a harder effort. And so you're actually worse. And sometimes you're actually better. It kind of varies based on how much I've done before, sleep, nutrition, etc. Right now, I know that if I feel I need it, I probably need it. And so I just take it. Whereas before I'd be like, nope, training every day. Like I gotta, because I work from home as a YouTuber, an entrepreneur, coach, etc. And so it's kind of what gets me out of the house, right? So it's almost like the centerpiece of my day. I work in the morning, then I train. I work in the evening, I go to sleep. Without the training, I'm kind of just at home all day. And so right now, I've learned to tell if I'm not recovered just based on how I feel in the morning. If I'm super groggy, if I feel like I got hit by a bus or something, then, okay, push it back. And then I just go for a walk if I feel like I'm not recovered. And then upper body, even if the volume is higher than lower body, it always recovers on time anyway. And so I have the lower body day first, just so I can use that as the metric for if I need to take a day off or not, basically.
Okay. So on average, you could say it's what, 5 to 6 days a week on average, and sometimes 7 if you're feeling really good, basically. So between 5 and 7 days.
Yeah, it probably averages about 6, I would say. It
Okay.
probably averages 6, occasionally 7, rarely 5.
Ah.
So probably like 6.2 or something on average. I haven't really looked at it.
Sure, sure. To what we were talking about before, my point there was that you're in the gym frequently, very frequently compared
A lot,
to,
yeah.
a lot compared to you can train hard or you can train long, but you can't do both. But you do both. So go ahead.
It's one of those things where there's a grain of truth, because if I did one set compared to if I do, say, 3 sets, sure, that one set would be harder. Even if I tried as hard as I could and I knew I was going to do 3 sets, you are holding back very slightly. It might be 1 rep in a 15 rep set. It might be like not grinding out quite as much, or like maybe if you're doing a row, maybe you're missing just a little bit of range of motion on those last few reps because there's another set or 2 to go. So I guess in the extreme, yes, if you're doing one set, conceptually, that is going to be harder than if you have 2 or 3 or 4 sets. And I think especially with the general population, if you have someone doing like 20 sets for chest in a day or something stupid like that, there's going to be a big falling off. It just gets like this sort of fluff and pump BS training that a lot of enhanced lifters, they use, and it works for them, but it's not going to work if you're natural. Yeah, in that case, the effort does tend to fall off quite a bit. And so I would agree in that situation. But you can train yourself to do a whole bunch of sets at like 90 to 95% effort, where they're still very, very productive, very, very high quality. And no one is going to look at me, because I post most of my training, or at least a lot of my training, on Instagram stories. And no one is going to look at those and be like, man, like he's not working hard. He'd be working way harder in a 1 set protocol. No one's going to say that, because the sets are still very, very, very hard. And you can build up to that. The distance running thing helps, but that's not specific. That's more just general recovery capacity and work capacity. Whereas you can build your specific work capacity and, to a certain extent, specific recovery capacity over time. And that might go down if you get stronger. If someone is a powerlifter and they're squatting 500 pounds for 20 reps or something silly, that is a sort of a different story, where they might need longer to recover or something like that. And they're probably not going to be doing a second set of AMRAPs on squats. But if it's like triceps pushdowns or something, you can't tell me that a second set is really going to be devastating to your recovery. And so a lot of these HIIT guys, I think it appeals to people from a time efficiency standpoint and just from a simplicity standpoint. People don't want to think. They just want to, oh yeah, like this guy says, everyone is wrong. Everything you knew about muscle growth was wrong. Just do 1 set. And it's sort of this like counterculture, oh, everyone is wrong except us, cultish mentality that is very appealing to some people. But that doesn't mean it's going to be optimal for everyone. And some people might get results from it, but man, you don't hear about the ones who don't get results. And that's going to be a lot of people on a really low volume training plan. Some people go from high volume to low volume and they do better. And some people go from low volume to high volume and do better. But not everyone is going to be reaching their potential on a 1 set per week training plan, especially not 1 set every 2 weeks or whatever craziness Menser was doing by the end of it. I mean, by the end, it was like so far off the beaten path that it's only going to work for like not even 1% of the population. And by work, I mean like work very, very well, like getting you to your potential. You'll get your newbie gains, sure, but just about everything will. And so, most people that I see doing really well on HIIT are either beginners, in which case, they're very enthusiastic about it, but that's just because it's the first training program they've ever done. And it's all they ever know. Or someone who is just fantastically gifted. I would consider myself gifted in some ways, but like the sensitivity to training, just that response to training, I'm not one of those guys who like brushes his hand lovingly across a dumbbell and gets huge biceps, right? Like some guys are like that. They're just, I don't know, it barely makes sense, but there are some guys like that who are just, they get jacked from sprinting, or they get jacked from swimming, or just like, stuff that doesn't even make sense, but they just, for whatever reason, they just are gifted in terms of sensitivity. So yeah, you put them on 1 set to failure and they do really well. And they might actually do better on that compared to like a more sort of moderate, reasonable, balanced plan that would work for the average person, because they are so sensitive to the training, right? For them, it's probably easier to overdo things than underdo things. And these guys also tend to be guys who get really good results, right? And so people who are getting average results see these guys doing well on this really low volume and they think, oh, well, that's the secret. Well, that's the secret for them, right? Like it worked for them, but it probably won't work as well for the average person. And most people are average, usually usually a middle of the road approach is best, at least at first. And then you can sort of play around with higher volume or lower volumes and see what works best for you. I've done silly volumes, especially for some areas. Like for my back training, I mean, I've been like 30, 35, 40 sets per week, all to failure. And some of them beyond failure, rows and stuff. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, like you must be sandbagging or like you're just bullshitting, just fluff and pump sets. No, they're all really, really hard sets. I'm just the other direction from the sensitivity where, I can handle the volume, but I also need much more volume than the average person to grow. Now, do I need 40 sets for back to grow? No, I could probably get away with a bit less, especially if I dial in the technique. And you can always get more out of every single set, whether it's your technique or your control or how hard you push, etc. And so I'm actually always trying to do less volume by making the sets harder. And there is that balance because I don't want to spend like more than 90 minutes in the gym a day. And so I'm trying to get the most out of every single set. It just ends up being a lot of volume because, that's just sort of where I end up and where I observe the most growth.
You brought up this idea of sprinters. I want to just elaborate on your point here. It's interesting how the high intensity community will latch onto that as an example relative to that quote we were talking about. And there is truth within that if you know where it applies, right? And for what context that applies in. Like you mentioned, training one set all out versus maybe a couple sets at like 90, 95%. Nobody's saying that you can't train hard and do more work, but yeah, you will hold back maybe to a small degree, whether it's subconsciously, whether it's just physiologically, you can't produce 100% maximal effort. Right. Let's look at sprinting. Usain Bolt running his world record time or his Olympic record time. Can he repeat that 3 minutes later at that exact same 100%? He'll be lucky if he could repeat that the next day, whether there's psychological aspects to that or physiological aspects, right? So when you look at how these guys train, I've also trained with Olympic level sprinters in high school before they became Olympic level athletes. They did 7, 8, 9 sets of 90 to 95%. Like that was the average type of training they did. So when you use them as an example to make your point within this high intensity world, right? It's almost like you're missing the example. The example is right there in front of you if you lived their world, because they're comparing it to the other end of the extreme, which is distance running.
Yeah.
They're both hard at the end of the day too. So, okay, it's just a quote and it's up to you to figure out where that applies, which you just elaborated on. But still, for those who may not know or are unaware, I thought it'd be a good time to bring that up, right?
Yeah, I agree, because you often see like the meme or the picture of like the jacked sprinter versus the skinny marathon runner. It's like one trains intensely, the other trains long. Which would you rather look like? Most sprinters do some amount of volume work. You don't see a single top level 100-meter sprinter who only sprints 100 meters, or only does 100-meter sprint like once a week.
For training.
Like, wow.
Yeah, that's it for the week.
Guess I'm done with my training. Yeah, I'm the lion of the jungle. That's all I need. I just need back rubs and one race a week and I'm good. No, they do tempo work. They do like 300-meter repeats. Michael Johnson did like 800-meter repeats. He would do 200-meter repeats and he would start at like 32 seconds, which for him, I mean, that's slow. I mean, it's 12 seconds over race pace. It's not fast at all, but he would take the guys through this workout. And because the recovery was short and there was a lot of volume, it would just absolutely trash the sprinters because they weren't conditioned to it. But that conditioning was what sort of propelled them through the rounds. If you're running a competition, it is that last 30, 40 meters of a 200-meter sprint where, that's not the talent part. That's the who did the work part, right? It's probably not a coincidence that he was also pretty good at 400 meters, world record there, Olympic medals as well, because, the speed endurance is there from the training. And, Usain Bolt, same thing. In the off season, especially, a lot of sprinters will run cross country, 5-kilometer races, and they're usually not that good at it, but it's useful, right? So sometimes doing the training that you suck at is exactly what you need. And this is usually not the stuff that is fun. Sprinters like to sprint. Sprinters don't like to do the workouts that are almost against their physiology in some ways, because it's just not what they're naturally good at. But, they can still benefit from building out a base, from just getting in better overall shape. And then you look at, the skinny distance runner. Well, I was a distance runner for many years. It's not like I couldn't get jacked. And so, sometimes I'll hear content creators say stuff like, oh yeah, all these skinny slow twitch guys. Well, you can be slow twitch and jacked, and you can be fast twitch and skinny. A lot of it depends on, androgen receptor density and just, I don't know, training for many years, like that seems to have a role as well.
And the type of training you're
Yeah, go
doing
ahead.
too, like the goal, right? So I wanted to
Oh, for
inject
sure.
that for those listening, like
Yeah.
a marathon or distance runner is training for that. That's why they look like that, right? So it's not because they can't get
Yeah.
big. It's just that's not
Well,
their goal.
yeah, exactly. Like my genetics for bodybuilding get better every year, you know? When I started lifting, no one was looking at me in the gym like, damn, that guy's got some good genetics for bodybuilding. No, and even after 5 years of lifting, which is roughly the time when I started on YouTube, I mean, no one was in the comments like fake natural or, oh, you must be on steroids or like, why should we take advice of the genetic elite, that kind of stuff. And now I see all these kind of comments and I'm like, my genetics didn't get any better, right? I'm just sort of uncovering what was there. And I think for most people, what's there is a lot more than they think, because they sort of give up too early. Again, I'm going back to memes, but it's like that picture of a guy mining for diamonds and it's a cross section. So you can see that the guy is about to hit the jackpot. He's about to hit this whole cache of diamonds. And you can see he's been digging for ages, but he's walking away. He just gave up. He just gave up because he dug for so long and he hadn't gotten any diamonds. And you can see from the cross section, if he kept going just a little bit longer, he would have all the diamonds he would ever need. He'd be set for life, but he's walking away. He's walking away. He threw his shovel away. He's looking dejected. I don't think training is that extreme because you're kind of building gradually, but man, you can go a lot farther than you think. I see people just sort of downplay what they can achieve. And going through your page as well, like just skimming down, I think for a lot of guys getting into lifting, especially if they focus on the PEDs, I'm sure if they saw the pictures of most of the guys that you interviewed, they'd be like, drugs, for sure, drugs. Oh my God, a delt vein, for sure, drugs. Oh, six-pack, drugs, biceps vein, drugs. Yeah, his skin is too thin, drugs. Like just all these ideas that if you look a certain way, well, it's got to be pharma. Like there's no way that is achievable naturally. Man, if I get these comments like the actual top guys, I mean, it must be just like incessant because they're on like another level compared to me.